Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. It's great to see everybody. You're welcome to keep your video off or turn it on, whatever you're more comfortable with. And if you'd like, you're able to introduce yourself in the chat and say where you're calling in from and say hello that way. We'll just slowly get started here with introductions while we have other folks coming on to join us. And just a heads up that we will close the meeting chat once our official conversation gets started after my quick introduction here, just to minimize distractions. But you are able to submit questions through the Q&A still. So just wanted to give that little housekeeping note first. But thank you all so much for joining us. This is the second installment in the Cancer Plus conversation series. For those who don't know me, my name is Elena Lindstrom, and I'm based in the Chicago area. And I began facilitating these webinars for my capstone project in the Humane Education MA program via the Institute for Humane Education with Antioch University, New England. I'd like to thank my colleagues from the program and specifically acknowledge my graduate advisor, Mary Pat, who is supporting the event today. Thanks again, Mary Pat. And so again, if you haven't already done so, you can feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and then we'll close that momentarily. As many of you know, the inspiration for Cancer Plus came after I received a grade 3 brain cancer diagnosis last summer. I really felt moved at that point to connect my studies with my cancer experience. And so I continue to be very grateful for this opportunity to host these dialogues, which try to be grounded in hope and inclusivity and compassion for anybody touched by cancer or another major health issue. So today's webinar, I'm very excited for. We have the title Cancer Plus Vocation, Making Meaning While Sustaining Oneself, which will focus on how illness like cancer affects our identities, our priorities, our careers, and our aspirations. So without further delay, I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists. So Thor Ringler is with us today. And Thor is a poet, therapist, and writer-editor at the William S. Middleton Memorial Veterans Hospital in Madison, Wisconsin. And he is also the National Program Manager for the VA's My Life, My Story initiative. So welcome, Thor. And Nicole Schalmo is a professional artist and an avid runner, half marathoner to be more specific, and she is based in New York City. Nicole has been living and thriving with grade 4 glioblastoma for nearly 5 years, which is awesome. So I'm so pleased to see both of you here, and I think we'll go ahead and get started. So we're going to go ahead and close up the chat for now. And so first, I'd like to just ask you both the same question, which will give you an opportunity, hopefully, to kind of share a little bit more about your personal story and how you got here. So I just like, first, Thor, if you would like to share just a little bit about your vocational journey. And so what do you dedicate your time to now, and how did you get there?
Yeah, thanks, Elena, and thanks for having me on the call. I'm really excited to be here and learn a lot too. So I'm looking forward to people's questions and comments as well. I've had very twisted vocational story that's taken many turns over the course of my life. My background is initially as a writer. I'm a poet primarily, but poetry doesn't pay any bills for most people. So I have had to adapt in lots of ways. So my first, I have an MFA in poetry from the University of Pittsburgh, and my first thought after I got that was that I would teach, because I thought that's what I wanted to do. I did that for about 5 or 6 years and decided I wasn't a good teacher, or I didn't like it, or some combination thereof. And I took a temp job and got into computers. So for like 15 years, I was a web designer and web developer. And then I decided I got interested in doing something more actively in the world, something where I could feel like I was contributing to the world in a little more tangible way than I was by working for a drug company's website. So I went back to school and got a marriage and family therapy degree. And that surprisingly took me to the VA of all places, which is interesting. I'm not a veteran. I don't come from a particularly military family. But in my final year of my internship year, I got an internship at the VA at the Vet Center, which is a counseling center for combat veterans. And I really fell in love with the people who I worked with and also just the mission of the institution. So I knew I wanted to work for the VA after that. And then lo and behold, a crazy job came up here at Madison, which was a pilot project, which was let's interview veterans here at the hospital about their lives, write up short stories for them, and then put those short stories in the medical chart so their doctors and nurses could read them. And I've been doing that for the last 10 years. We started with one program here at Madison. We're now at 70 VA hospitals, the program. And it's also spread outside the VA to 20 or 30 non-VA hospitals now. So I'm here because of happenstance and chance and something just turning out that way. So that's my vocational story, and I dedicate my time to listening to people and trying to understand what's important to them and reflecting that back to them in the stories that I write. So that's my life pretty much. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Thor. That reminds me of a career workshop I went to once where the facilitator described the journey between vocations as less like following a straight road and more like hitchhiking between things, and just what you said about some of the serendipity. And I just feel like you definitely are doing really amazing things with this special program that you lead now. So thank you. Nicole, I'd like to now ask you the same question. So could you tell us a little bit about your vocational journey, and again, what do you dedicate your time to now and how did you get there?
Yeah, for sure. Also, thank you again so much for making space for these conversations. I hadn't really had time to sit down with a lot of these topics, so I feel like it was important for me to take that time now. And I also want to congratulate you on getting your MA during all of this. So little to you, just you're so inspiring. And again, thank you for giving us this space. And before I get started, I will let you all know my family and friends like to lovingly say I take the scenic route to get to the point. So I have some detailed notes that I'm going to be referencing, and I thank you in advance for your patience as I make my way through these answers. So yes, with that, I will begin. My vocational story started when I decided to move to New York for college, really. I knew I was going to be a Broadway star. So I was living in California, and I knew I needed to be in New York to make the connections to get on Broadway, because that's how it was going to work. So I moved out here, got my BFA or Bachelor's of Fine Arts from Adelphi University. And I even booked a gig right out of college. I toured for a year with Missoula Children's Theater. And then when I eventually landed back in the city, I had to sit with the realization of, I think, frankly, what Thor was talking about is finding that balance of being an artist and paying the bills. So I became an artist slash insert any job here that was paying the rent. The waiter, bartender, dog walker, nanny. I did many of those things while also being able to audition and perform in plays at night. And eventually, I actually ended up forming my own Shakespeare company because I was tired of being cast in the ensemble because all the other people were more connected. So I had the realization, if I had my own company, maybe I could just play the parts I wanted to play. So did that for a while, found great success with that until eventually I had the realization that I was exhausted and that living paycheck to paycheck just was not working. I was not having the energy I needed to be creative. So I then shifted and made the really hard decision to find a 9-to-5, which at that time was the end of your artist career. If you're not a starving artist, right, then you're not an artist. So made the decision then. I think Thor said I made the decision to start temping. I feel like we have a little similar storylines there. And eventually found myself at a temp job that started as my covering the receptionist's 2-week vacation. And then they invited me to stay on to do a little more and a little more. And one day I found myself in the HR office being offered a full-time job with a salary and benefits assisting the CFO. So I vividly remember taking a deep breath and saying that I would love to work here, but I needed the flexibility to be able to audition whenever I wanted to and take days when I was cast in things. So when the woman said yes, I ran out of that office as quickly as possible because I was pretty sure she had no idea what she had just agreed to. So I started my full-time job there, and honestly, it was a dream. At that point, I was not only paying my bills, I was doing more than that, and I still had time to work and do plays and continue my journey as an artist, and was not as exhausted as the paycheck to paycheck. And the firm actually stayed true to their word when I was offered a midday audition for a lead role in an independent feature film. They let me go audition. And from there, I actually ended up booking that job. And then I found out they needed me to film in Australia for 6 weeks. So that's when the decision came. I helped my firm find my replacement there. So I was able to fly out to film. And then eventually, when I came back from those 6 weeks, I was very fortunate. The replacement they had found wasn't working out. So they called me back. I mean, this is unheard of. This never happens. So I went back in a different role as an executive assistant. So ideally, they thought that would be a little more flexible, more vacation days. And I mean, obviously, I said yes. So, of course, keeping in mind here, actually, I didn't mention this. So we hadn't actually been able to finish completing filming yet. So I was able to take some vacation days to fly back out to Australia for a bit. And there was some confusion with my visa. We don't need to get into all of that. I ended up having to fly right back. We weren't able to finish filming. So I got home having no idea what was going to happen next. And I went to bed one night in May of 2018, and I woke up in an MRI machine. So I would later be diagnosed with a grade 4 glioblastoma. And I know we'll get into that a little later. But so yeah, 5 years later, I still have MRIs every 4 months to see if my scans show any signs of regrowth. And I'm now able to work part-time as a producer, which is able to let me prioritize my health. And frankly, it allows me to focus on what fills my life with joy right now, which has turned into weekly voice training and training for races to raise much needed funds for brain cancer research. So my current vocation, I suppose you could say, is cancer survivor and artist. I'm really grateful to have a support system that allows me to continue moving on in that way. And I guess I already answered the last part of your question first. That's how I got here. So yes, thank you. Appreciate it.
Perfect. That's great. Thank you, Nicole. I feel like it's definitely I like that you said the cancer survivor and artist, and I think a lot of people, and as you hinted, we'll get into that next with my next question for you, which relates to holding those two things at the same time. So how have you balanced your treatment your diagnosis, your treatment, and the ongoing scans that you still do, and now and overall just your well-being and survivorship with your career as an artist and your training for marathons and all the other incredible things that you're doing with your time and the things that are bringing you joy?
Yeah, I think I made a note here to myself. It's just it's so hard to condense the answer into an organized fashion, but I'm gonna give it a try. So after my craniotomy, so when they found the mass in my brain, they had to remove it. So after my craniotomy, when I was diagnosed with a grade 4 glioblastoma, I began a treatment plan that included 6 months of radiation therapy, 5 days a week, combined with oral doses of chemotherapy taken for 30 days, followed by a higher dosage of chemo pills 5 days every 23 days for a year. So all of this to say, it was rough. The combination of chemo and radiation, it made me nauseous and exhausted for days. And I still remember I still needed to complete filming because we hadn't completed that yet. So honestly, it was some of the hardest work I've done. I was able to fly up to Calgary with my husband to finish that. I was hyper focused on the work. And when I got home from a long day on set, I would just let myself sob through the exhaustion with my husband right there next to me, sleep, and get back at it the next day. So I somehow made it through that first trip and back home. And then I honestly received a call to be in a play that I was able to perform in. And then after that was when it really settled into, I guess let me fast forward a bit. Yes, that was in 20, sorry, my notes are a little confused. Oh yes, so fast forward from there, I still get my, oh yes. So my scan started at from every 8 weeks to every 3 months. So where I'm at now is every 4 months. And I still get what my neuro-oncologist calls scanxiety before each MRI. There's no cure for brain cancer, so there is always a chance that my MRI will show signs of regrowth and I'll be right back into treatment. But as of my latest MRI on May 26th, my scans are stable. So now I get to enjoy being in that beautiful in-between part where I can just enjoy this time before my next MRI in September. And admittedly, it hasn't been easy to essentially break my life up into 4-month chunks. This is actually where my running came in to be really helpful. I ran a 5K to fundraise for the American Brain Tumor Association when I was first diagnosed, and that felt really good to be a part of that community and honestly to control something, and I'm sure you can relate to this, Elena, to have control over something during that first year of treatment. And after I finished my treatment in September of 2019, I decided that I wanted to run walk the New York half marathon, which was scheduled for March of 2020. So when that race was canceled at the last minute because of COVID, and much to my family's dismay, sorry, Mom, I know you're on here. I mapped out my own 13.1 race course through my local park because people had donated money and I didn't want to let people down. So I made that happen, and it was really such a joy to find my family and friends waiting at my designated finish line. And, but yeah, so especially at that time, I think I had made it past the 18-month mark, or math is hard, but it meant a lot to be able to get that done. And now, oh yes, so now making time for training is honestly like another form of therapy, really. I mean, yes, there are days that it feels crazy to put on my running shoes and get out there, but it's also just time to really be full of gratitude for not having the many physical issues after brain surgery and that brain cancer and tumors can cause. So I have a daily, oh yes. So yes, the running has become easy, but I have to admit here, I still have daily doubts about whether I can call myself an artist anymore. A runner, absolutely. A cancer survivor, a strong woman, 100%. But I'm still, but am I still an artist if all I'm doing is auditioning for things virtually after COVID and showing up to my voice training each week? Like, that's very real. Does that count? So in my heart, I know it does. Like when I come out of each voice lesson, I am full of joy. I know it counts. When I crack myself up doing silly audition tapes, I know that counts. And that's a big thing, but not knowing where I think it's just a struggle, not knowing where I want to be 5 years from now, because it's hard to envision that when it's just from scan to scan. And I just wanted to bring that up because I feel like it's important, especially for people that are going through treatment, to just have this genuine, open honesty about there are really hard times. And that's all part of my ongoing process here as far as being an artist and really trying to claim that status of artist/cancer survivor. I hope that.
Well, you brought up so many great things that I feel like I related to so much of that former theater major and also dealing with the scan to scan life mindset shift. I think that's something that a lot of people with this kind of health issue can definitely relate to. So I appreciate that. And you're mentioning it in a really honest way that about like what questions remain open. So Thor, I'm going to turn it back to you. So how has the work that you do in the clinical setting shaped you as a writer, and how has it shaped you as a person?
Um, Great questions. So let's see. So if yeah, it's been really interesting. I think for me, I've been a writer. I've written my whole life. You know, with the thought of it, being the thought, I guess, the selfish thought of being a famous writer, right? Like somebody who people recognize their names. I think everybody has these sort of grand illusions about what they're going to be in the world, and like, oh, I'll be famous someday. So that hasn't panned out. But what is really interesting is the I think being able to interview people, especially in the setting that I'm in the VA, and many of these, most of these interviews are done bedside. So I'm sitting in a chair next to someone who's sick, for all kinds of different reasons. They could be there for something minor. They could be there for a lung transplant. They could be 2 days out from a lung transplant. They could have just had their left knee removed, their leg removed below the left knee. So I'm sitting with people who are in a vulnerable place in their life, right? And so I get to listen to them, right? And hear them talk about their lives, and I get to write for them. So it's actually been the best, I'd say the best and the most rewarding writing that I've ever done in my life, because my audience is right in front of me. And I kind of know who they are, just from having talked to them for an hour. And I get to give them, the best job that I can do with what they told me. And so in that way, it's definitely the most rewarding writing I've ever done. It's the smallest audience I've ever written for, but the most rewarding for me, and I think the most meaningful to them. So I think that's really shaped me as a writer and made me realize that, I have skills, and I can use these in ways that directly help other people. And that's powerful. And of course, in the back of my mind, I'm still thinking, oh yeah, I'll be Yates or Keats or one of those people. But in truth, I get rewarded every day by what I do. So I have to remind myself of that. And the second question, how's it shaped me as a person? I think, I guess I've just realized, that, I guess just that thought, that the best thing that you can do in the world is to give of yourself for other people, to give what you have, what you can do to help other people. And I've come to realize that that's more important than anything else. And I guess that's shaped me as a person. In some ways, you become a full person by, giving of yourself fully to other people. So in some ways, your identity, actually, who you are, becomes real and formalized and full when you give yourself fully, and that's when you are yourself, I feel. So I'll stop. Thank you.
No, that's beautiful, Thor. I really appreciate that. And I love that concept that you become who you are when you give of yourself fully. That's what words to live by. Thank you. So while we're on this subject of how you've been shaped by your experiences, Nicole, I wanted to ask you, how has living with brain cancer affected, and you've touched on some of this already, but how has living with brain cancer affected your identity and self-perception, particularly in your relationship to your working life through the past 5 years? And maybe you can speak to more of what you were talking about too, with the living scan to scan, and like just adjusting your perspective on time and energy and all those things. Asking for a friend.
Asking for a friend. Yeah, I think it still continues to be a challenge. And I think more recently, it's helpful to start more recently. It's only because I've been able to take the time to slow down to understand that it is just okay to be in the moment, and that it's okay to not be okay. I think that was a big realization for me. And I did make some actually very detailed notes here, because this was one of the questions I just made a note that it's a really good question, and it's something that I've actually been thinking about since throughout my entire cancer journey. And it's some of the harder stuff. So I decided I'd start with the lighthearted stuff as far as my identity as a runner. So when I first started running, I think I ran my first half marathon in 2017. At that time, running was honestly just something that I was doing purely to lose weight for acting. Like, I convinced myself that once I looked a certain way, then I would be famous, and then I would get so all I needed to do was just burn the calories, and running was easy for that. So nothing more. So today, it's actually a part of who I am. It's a way I get to enjoy nature and be connected to my local community of runners as we gather each Saturday up in Inwood Park to do our community runs. And it's a way for me to raise money for brain cancer research. So that was a huge shift. And honestly, in those harder times, I've really needed those runs over the past 5 years to help me process through the ups and downs of grasping for who I was after my life changed so suddenly. Who was I, like I was saying before, if I wasn't working at an office and auditioning all the time, continuing my journey towards stardom? So as my scans continued to come back clear, I actually started to feel more and more uneasy about being on the long-term disability that the company had provided for me. Everyone that is close to me was very quick to remind me that I was on long-term disability because any high-stress situations can trigger tumor regrowth. Running to keep my body healthy was definitely not the same as working a full-time job in front of a computer all day. So even the claim that was written about why I couldn't return to my old job was sensitivity to screens, and I still today have to use a timer to be sure that I'm not pushing myself too far. So that was very real. But I am not and was not what comes to mind when you think of a disabled person. So as the months went on, it started to feel more and more like a lie, because it felt too horrible to accept the fact that everything I held to be true about myself had changed. That was a really hard thing to sit with. So I was in the middle of processing through all of this when the insurance company called and started a review. And honestly, this still all plays out in my head like some kind of a movie. Someone doing a dramatic double take when they saw that I was still alive in 2021 after a glioblastoma diagnosis in 2019. A pause where they realize I'm in my early 30s and they're still paying me. So I have to choose to see it this way, but I can only see it this way now because I've taken a lot of time, excuse me, I'm sorry, just to reflect back and be at peace with what happened. Because the company eventually came to the conclusion, after a solid month of prying questions about why I couldn't return back to work, that I no longer qualified for disability, going so far as to mention that they Googled my name and found that I had been filming and acting during my treatment. So doing what I loved, because I didn't know how long I had left, was suddenly being thrown in my face as my cheating the system somehow. So I say all of this to get to a very important point. It continues to be very difficult to make space, to both be full of gratitude, identifying proudly as an artist and a cancer survivor, while also knowing that I am one of a very small percentage of people who have been lucky enough to have had no real side effects and to still be here 5 years later, especially with a glioblastoma diagnosis. So to have an insurance company double down on what my awful inner voice often shouted when I was feeling my most exhausted. I wasn't working anymore, and I think this relates to sometimes now on my bad days. I wasn't working anymore, and I wasn't an artist. I wasn't disabled. I was just surviving from scan to scan to do what? There was a very real time where I felt adrift and not knowing how I identified anymore or what I was supposed to be doing with this precious time. So I've only had enough time recently, honestly, prepping for this webinar and in the few months before this, to dig deeper into those really darker, more uncomfortable areas and sit for a while and be more curious to see that I needed to go through all of that to eventually be connected with more people through the ABTA with my running, and to meet beautiful, inspiring people like you, Elena. who have put this all together so that we're all here connecting today. And I kind of feel like that's a non-answer, and I hope I answered the other questions you said. But I feel like I've also just been so inspired hearing all the ways you're affecting people's lives, and I completely agree, Thor. It's part of my identity now, and it is so helpful to be able to sit here and be vulnerable and genuine, because it's not all sunshine and rainbows. And it is a lot from scan to scan. And at the same time, I am still so happy that I have this time and that I am still maintaining my health. Um, so yeah, thank you.
Well, that's it. I feel like there's nothing I could say that would fully encapsulate a sufficient response to all the different elements that you touched on there, but I completely relate to some of what I feel like getting at with, like, I've always say now that I'm glad that I don't have to choose between like cancer and the perspective it gives you, because it's definitely eye-opening, and it would be an impossible question to have to go back if you could be selective about your life experiences, which I think it's good that we all don't have that power. But and I also think you brought up a lot of really good and interesting points about like ability and disability, and how that, and also the privilege that comes with being still able to work. And I also completely relate to the feeling of like being a workaholic and the invasiveness of questions with filling out like disability paperwork, and even the category of like disability that brain cancer patients and other cancer patients and others with terminal illnesses are in, is like, just can be a weird, it's just a lot of weird feelings, that come with going down that route, and then having to navigate a way out of it or through it. So thank you for all of that. So Thor, I'm going to turn it back to you with another question.
Sure.
So the patients you interact with obviously have this shared vocational history of having served in the military. And I wanted to ask you what other reoccurring themes you have noticed across their reflections, and thus in the stories that you write.
Yeah. So I just want to preface this by saying, I'm not an I'm not an expert on the military. I haven't served. I know nothing about that experience. All I know is from interviewing hundreds and hundreds of people about their experiences. So I'm an outsider to that world, right? And always will be. And I think that's important, to never think that you can know what it's like for somebody else. You never know. You can never know never know how it feels to be someone else, but you can walk in their shoes, right? And feel what they feel when they share those feelings with you, right? And you can be alongside them as they walk you through their life, right? So that's the perspective that I'm talking from here. And I guess I would say, just from my own, this comes back to something that you were saying before, Lena, a question that you asked about, how do you hold two identities together in one person, right? And I think for the veterans that I interview, many of them, their time in the military, being from a young age, 18 to 21 or 22, it's formative. They're still essentially children, not yet adults, yet they're doing very adult things, and that experience impacts them. Most of them, not all of them, but many of them, in a way that's with them for the rest of their lives. And so that identity as a soldier is with them. And for some of them, because of the nature of their service and what they did, that identity is a very difficult one to hold alongside their identity as a civilian in the rest of the world, because either they served in combat, they saw things, they did things that they had to do, they served their country, they made these choices. That identity is with them forever. And it's very hard for them to even talk to people outside the military about those experiences and what they mean, because we don't understand them, right? So you can't understand, how close you get to the people you serve with in these situations where it's life and death, where they're literally there to, protect you. That closeness doesn't exist in the civilian world. That sense of relying on somebody else that much, it doesn't exist for us. And so it's very hard for them to talk about that with outsiders, like myself. So I think that's one thing that I feel is there's this, it's like I think someone told me this once, it's like you're standing in two different streams at the same time, right? So one is this stream from the past, right? That's who you were as a vet and what you did there. And the other is your civilian life stream where you're like the normal, regular person. And those two things don't flow necessarily in parallel or even next to each other or even together. And so how do you make sense of that? So I think that for me is a part of, what I've learned about, the veteran experience, I guess, but also for myself personally. I think it comes back to, I've come to understand by doing this work why I'm drawn to it. And I've come to understand that, my own experience, I experienced quite a bit of trauma as a child, both sexual and physical. And so that has stuck with me my whole life. And I've worked with it my whole life. And my own personal take on these things is that it's not something you overcome, it's something that you are, right? And trauma is not something that you get over and you're like, oh, I'm done with that. No, because it's core to you, right? It's your identity. And your job, if there is a job, is to integrate. I don't even like that word because I don't even feel like you can really do this. It's just kind of talking, but make peace, I guess, with these parts of yourself that don't fit into this regular world that we're in. And so, and for me, I guess that's the connection that I really feel with vets. I've never experienced being in the military, but I've experienced trauma as a child. And I understand, or I know what it's like to struggle in a world where those experiences don't make sense and never will. And so you're left, who do you talk to about those experiences? Your therapist, obviously, and obviously I went into therapy, I wanted to become a therapist because I was in therapy most of my life. And so I spent time on one side of the couch and time on the other, both those things. And so I guess that's the connection that I feel with veterans and when I work with them. And also the other thing that I really feel is I'm because of the experiences that I had, which were instigated by male figures, I'm not someone who trusts the male species very much at all. In fact, I deeply distrust men in all areas of my life. I have very few friends who are male. I don't hang out with men ever in groups. I find them frightening and terrifying. And so and for me, I guess this has been a way for me to connect with the goodness that's in men, and I see these men who are so different than me and have had such different lives, and yet I see them and I have compassion for them and I have compassion for what they've been through, and I love them, and I think that's really what that connection is really powerful for me, because I want to know that we're worth saving, that men are worth saving. And they are. So.
Thank you, Thor. That was all really powerful. And I really appreciated so many things you said, especially starting with when you were talking about just like being an outsider, needing to acknowledge that in this work. And I think there's a lot of value that comes with that outside perspective. And then what you were sharing about blocking, the kind of the traumatic or hiding the traumatic aspects of like our histories and identities, and coming to a place of acceptance with them, that history, but how, until or even when that acceptance can happen for you, that, there's a lot of barriers that are created, and it's just really valuable work that you're doing to be reaching across those lines. And I think that and I kept, when you were talking about the streams too, I'm picturing like all the streams that people are spread across with, as dealing with illness can be a stream of its own sometimes, or dealing with whatever, all kinds of different, like you said too, different kinds of like abuse and trauma like that too is another stream. It's like, so one person could go through so many different rivers there. So I really appreciate everything you shared there. So I have 2 more questions for each of you before we open it up to the Q&A segment. So Nicole, my question for you is, what advice you would give to your past self or another newly diagnosed cancer patient with the knowledge that you've gained now?
Yeah, thank you. And Thor, thank you for sharing that. It's just so appreciate sharing it. Like, and again, Elena, this space is just brilliant. So thank you again for that. So I definitely know the advice I would give my past self is a little different from what I give to newly diagnosed patients, which Elena can actually attest to. The advice I would give my past self is honestly that I didn't need to do anything other than rest and let my body fight the cancer and the poison I was taking to fight that cancer. I did not need to be the best cancer patient that there ever was or raise the most money to fight this research. I'm able to see now that I needed to be that hyper-focused, frankly, just to not have to look at the terror of I think it maybe 16 to 18th month prognosis was what I was looking at for the glioblastoma. So I realize now that I needed that focus, but if I could go back, I would definitely love to just say it's okay. You don't have to be the A+ student and the best and gold stars. But then as far as newly diagnosed patients, first, and I think most importantly, what I always like to say is to listen to your body and trust your body, and that's all you can really do. And because whatever, I think, yeah, what I made a note here to be sure, I said whatever allows your body the least amount of stress is usually right. So I made the choice to shift to an entirely different lifestyle that included fasting before my treatments, before my chemo treatments, a whole food vegan diet, and a cold pressed juice each day. But that is not right for everyone. But it's worked for me. And 5 years later, I'm still here. So the second bit of advice actually came from my brother. So he's an Air Force veteran. He was in Special Forces. And I believe I told you this advice, Elena, which is that anyone can make it through 60 seconds of anything. And that was huge advice coming from him. And I needed that advice in the very beginning just to make it through all the nights that were so rough. I had to break it down, those 60 seconds to begin with, in 10-second increments. But my brother was right. Even in 10 seconds, 60 seconds passes, and then the next, and then the next, and eventually you've made it through that moment of pain or struggle. So I think that's my first nicely condensed answer. Trust your body. Anybody can get through anything in 60 seconds. And you don't need to be the gold star student. Just rest when you need to rest.
Thank you, Nicole. I was really hoping you would share your 60-second
Yeah.
tidbit, because I definitely use that advice, used and used
Yes.
that advice
Yes.
all the time. So thank you. Okay, and then Thor, my question for you is, how might you suggest folks who are curious about writing their own life stories or interested in having meaningful conversations with their loved ones about their lives or their work histories, their dreams and goals, how might they begin that process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, I think if you want, I think if one thing that I've kind of learned from doing this is that if you want to talk to loved ones about difficult things that have happened to you, it's best maybe, or it can be, to write it down and give them the written thing rather than say it. So I think that one of the things that happens really frequently with the stories, I hear a lot of really, really profoundly challenging stories where my faith in humanity, honestly, is destroyed. I don't know what other word for it. And so how do you build back from that, right? And how do people share those stories with people who they love? Because I think you all know, like, writing something down on paper is a lot different than speaking to them in a room, right? Like, how can you share something without like breaking down, completely, or the fear of it happening? So I would say, if you have something that you want to share with someone about a hard part of your life, it might be helpful to, write it down, or have someone interview you about it and then have them write it down and you share it. It's a way of lessening what's the word? The fear, right, of it, the fear of talking about things that haven't been spoken about for years and years and years. So how do you do that? How do you tell someone about something that you haven't told them in 30 or 40 or 50 years? So how do you do that? That's a very scary thing to do, right? So think about what would be a way for you to do that would feel safe for you. I think that's really important. And oddly or funnily enough, we get so much feedback from veterans' families saying, "Oh, he never talked about this with us. She never talked about this with us," over and over and over again. It's the first time we ever heard about this. And they're like, "How did you do this?" And I'm almost like, well, they don't know us. They don't have to take care of us. They're not, you don't want to disclose painful things to people you love because it hurts them too, right? It does. It's painful for them, right? And you don't want to inflict that pain on them. But, someone you're never going to meet again, you're talking to for an hour. It's like the stranger syndrome, right? You can, if you're talking to somebody on you can have a very intimate conversation about your life and talk about things that you would never talk about with your family on a train, or a bus, striking up a conversation with an emotive person next to you who listens, so. And then I would just say, writing your own stories. I think that's something that we all can do, and I think it can be a practice too. I think there are certain stories that we return to over and over again. So obviously stories of trauma are that way, but also stories of connection, right? There are stories that we tell them over, we tell them differently 10 years from now, 15 years from now. They're like touchstones, right, that we return to. And when we return to them, they have different meanings to us, right? And so I think that that's something to think about too. Like what I could interview someone today, I could interview a veteran today, and if I interviewed them 7 years later, it might be a really different story. It will be a really different story, actually. And I kind of hope it's a really different story, because like that means they're moving right through life and making different connections. So I would just say, have the courage to write down your own stuff, and talk to other people too, because actually you learn a lot more from other people than you learn from yourself. I've learned way more from every interview I do. I learn something about myself and about my life, and something that I can take with me. And so there's a lot more learning to be done by listening to other people than by running around inside your own head all the time, which I do a lot of. I run around inside my head all the time. And there's nothing wrong with it, but it's really nice to be, to talk to somebody else and go, oh, right, there's this whole other world out there, this whole other person, and they know so much, So I would just say, other people's life stories are maybe more interesting than ours in some way, more inspiring, I guess, more, and certainly teach us a lot more. So,
Thank you, Thor. That's great. I totally relate to the running in your head, and also the being so appreciative of other people's stories. Like both of you, this was such a good conversation. I'm so grateful for the time that you both put in and the thoughtfulness you put into your answers. So I want to move us now to the Q&A. So I want to remind everybody to feel free to submit things through the Q&A box, which is different than the chat. So we do already have a couple of contributions there. One of our participants, Joanna, said, thank you for sharing and discussing these very meaningful questions, challenges, and opportunities. Reminds me that quote from Lao Tzu, new beginnings are often disguised as painful endings. Thank you, Joanna. That was really nice to hear that. And then we have a question from Amanda, who asked about how do you stay positive when you're feeling bad? And I think I'm going to interpret this, Amanda, as feeling physically ill. So Nicole, would you want to share any thoughts about that? How you maintain your upbeat attitude, which I'm sure part of that, as you shared before, is it doesn't always get maintained consistently, but
yeah, I would say it's definitely a delicate balancing act. I think honestly it has a lot to do with the time I have separated out to kind of refill the bucket, because that allows me to be present in the moment and find those moments of gratitude. And more recently, I think kind of, I don't know, bouncing a bit off of what Thor was saying, I think it is really important to take time to just sit and take a moment to realize that this really sucks, period. Because I found that I was actually draining a lot more energy running in circles, just trying to fix it or find the why or feel like I was somehow doing something wrong, because I should just be grateful for being here and being alive. And luckily I got brain cancer and it stays in your brain. Like all of those things were exhausting me. And I love that you're laughing, because it's like, yep, same story here. So I think now it's, I guess, really the positivity comes from taking moments to not be positive, to taking moments to go on a really hard run and pause somewhere to cry, to watch like the first 5 minutes of Up and let myself sob. Sometimes I'll just do that. I'm like, I feel like I just need to let this out for a moment. So I think that in tandem allows me to have these beautiful open moments of clarity, to be grateful to be here with all of you, and thank you all for coming. And I guess that, yes, I think that's the best advice I could give. That's
great, Nicole. I totally relate to for the the sometimes you just need the outlet to cry and be there, be with that emotion and find ways to just not have to maintain
and just
a
to quickly,
certain
just to quickly add,
rational.
that
Mhm.
also I think doubles down, and I'm sure Thor could maybe have I know we're running short, but just doubles down as far as like, yes, physically bad, but I do feel like especially the longer you are with a long-term illness like brain cancer, it really is, as the physical aspects fade away, the feeling mentally bad, it's almost like you have to it's like, what is my reasoning from having a hard mental health day? And I think that what I'm coming to now is that it's just as important for me to say, I'm having a bad day and I'm really sad today, and that's it. So I think that's making space for me to find this cheerful disposition, and I wouldn't have been able to do that if I were stuffing everything down. I don't know if that relates, but
That totally makes sense. So
questions.
no, not at all. And we'll get to as many as we can. I appreciate that people are sending them in, and I know that it's never enough time. I feel like even though it's an hour, but I know we could probably be here all day if we wanted to. So Thor, I do want, if you had anything to share on that topic that we just covered, feel free. But another question for you is, how has your job as a professional listener changed the way you listen on an everyday basis? That's from my dad, Steve.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'd like to answer that in a self-flattering way and say that it's made me a better listener, but I'm not going to do that, because that's not true. There's times when I tune out my wife and my kids, and I'm not listening to what they're saying, or some coworker. I would say that I've become. I guess what I would say is that I've become aware just that there's a lot of different kinds of listening in the world, and there's not just one kind of listening. And I think because I went through like formal training as a therapist, I came out of that program thinking, oh, I know how to listen to people. I've been doing this for years, right? And then I get to this job and I'm like, oh, wait, this is a totally different kind of listening, right? This is totally different because I'm not trying to fix anything, right? I'm not in a partnership with this person trying to make them feel better. All I'm doing is a witness. All I'm doing is witnessing, right? And so that's a really different kind of listening, right? Because, and there's something very liberating about that. So people share things with you that they don't even share with their therapists. Like I get mental health people here telling me all the time, oh, this guy told me all this stuff about his life, and I read this story and I didn't know half of it, and these are people who they've been seeing for 10 or 15 years. So why is that? Because we're listening in a different way. But at the same time, I would say that it places a burden on you too, right? Because you are literally taking a story into you and you don't have that feeling like, oh, I'm helping someone. All you're doing is listening. So you feel very powerless, sort of helpless in some way, and like it stays in you in a different way. So I would say that it's different that way. I think over time I've come to feel like I do actually give something back, right? Like the story itself is what I give back and what I give to the person. And so there is a part where I'm being actively, doing something with what I hear, even if it's painful. But it's a different thing to take that stuff in and not know where to put it, I guess. I still struggle with that. I don't know, quite what to do with all the stories sometimes.
A lot of sense, Thor, and I appreciate you sharing that. I feel like it's just a lot of heavy things to carry, even if you're going to bring it back out in a new form. You kind of have to do some transformational magic, even though you're also trying to, of course, like represent what you were received too. So that's definitely an art form. Going back to our artistry conversations. Another question that I think we can fit in is from Maggie. Thanks, Maggie. Maggie said, thank you so much for your heartfelt responses. What advice would you give to someone who just found out someone in their lives has been diagnosed with glioblastoma? What was helpful to experience from those around you, and what was less helpful to you? So Nicole, I think you can answer that one.
Whew. Can I hear it one more time? And hi, Maggie.
It was thank you so much for your responses. What advice would you give to someone who just found out that somebody in their lives has been diagnosed with glioblastoma? So what was helpful to you in terms of other people, and what was not?
I think what was helpful is just staying in the moment with it and doing your best to be in every moment, and cycling back to what I offer newly diagnosed people is just doing what causes the least amount of stress to them. And I almost wonder if I've just blocked out all this information that wasn't good and wasn't helpful in the beginning, because I guess I would say I don't think I got very much of this, but the whole idea, because it's a very heavy diagnosis. Again, you're Googling and it's like, hey, you may not live past a year. Best of luck. So I think the folks that weren't able to read the room and were like, you're going to be just fine. There were moments where that came in where that wasn't helpful, but I do feel like for the most part, my friends and family were able to just sit with me in that weight and feel out the tender moments of being able to say, yeah, this really sucks. Do you want to watch the first 5 minutes of Up? So I would say, yeah, it's a very delicate balance, because it's a heavy diagnosis to get, but you really don't know. I mean, I'm here 5 years later, and I think that's another thing. So I guess.
Yes, that is awesome. And it's very inspiring to me all the time. And also, I feel like that was a nice connection back to what Thor said earlier too, about you can't know exactly where somebody's been, but you can walk with them. And so I feel like that is like a takeaway theme that I'm going to be thinking about after our conversation today, which I see now that it is 2:00. So, and I know some people have a hard stop. So I just want to thank you both so much for your time. and for just like all of the vulnerability and openness in the conversation. I want to thank everybody for attending and coming here today. It was great to have you all in this conversation. And I wish it could just go on and on. And I know we all have the rest of our days and lives to return to, but this was really special, and we will have it recorded too and be able to share it on the Cancer Plus website. So we'll all have this to circle back to as needed and desired. And we will have the next Cancer Plus event coming up in the evening of July 6th, I believe, which is the Thursday after, yes, the Thursday after July 4th weekend, and we'll have Margaret Dubé-Micus with us. She is a cancer survivor, a poet, former biology professor. She's also, like Thor and Nicole, is a very interesting and accomplished and insightful person, and so she'll be leading us through some journaling workshops and reading some of her poems as well. So I hope that all of you will be able to join us for that. But in the meantime, thank you all so much for coming, and I hope you have a great rest of your days. Nicole
Thanks,
and Thor,
Elena.
thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thanks, everybody.
I appreciate you all. All right, bye-bye, everybody. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.